QSO Today, episode 330, Rob Suggs NN4NT. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you to check out their new IC705 all-band portable transceiver and their new ID52A dual-band portable radio shipping now. My thanks to ICOM America for their continued support of the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth4Z1UG, your host. I want to call out Flex Radio for becoming the first of two platinum sponsors for the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo coming March 2021. If your company or organization would like to be represented in the expo, please contact me. We have made many improvements over the last expo to make it even more interactive. See you at the expo. One of the great advantages about being the host of the QSO Today podcast is getting to interview hams who are not only active and love ham radio, but also they have interesting day jobs as well. Rob Suggs NN4NT is a space scientist at NASA, specializing in outer space environments that protect our astronauts from the hazards of space, including space junk and debris. Like a kid in a candy store, I got to ask my burning NASA questions, and Rob was a great sport. I hope that you will enjoy this QSO with NN4NT as much as I did. NN4NT, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Rob?
Yes, I am. Good to meet you.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, I think like many of the folks you've had on your program here, I grew up in the mid-'60s. And I recall my brother and I getting a pair of CB walkie-talkies one time for Christmas, and that was my first introduction to radio communications, I guess. And that was a lot of fun. Kind of amazed me that we could talk down the block with something fairly simple like that. Then a little bit later, I got a crystal radio set, and it must have been a Cub Scout set. And I remember they asked you to hook up the ground wire to the finger stop on the old dial telephones. And some of your listeners will remember those. Just a wire hanging out from that, and picked up a local AM broadcast station. Fortunately, there was one not too far away from our home in North Georgia. I think that's when I became aware there's just this electromagnetic energy all around us. It just kind of amazed me that without a battery, I could hear this thing. So there was a lot of energy there. So that was kind of interesting and sort of piqued my curiosity. Did a lot of, I'll call them electrical experiments with electric trains, shorting out the tracks and seeing what would happen, and playing with those kind of things. Took apart a lot of old radios. I don't think I took apart any working ones, but I was just fascinating with the components in them and wondered how they worked.
What was the hometown?
Yeah, it was Rossville, Georgia, which is just south of Chattanooga, Tennessee. I think my aunt gave me an AM radio kit to build, and that was not successful. I was building it with a wood burner rather than a soldering iron, and not surprisingly, it didn't work. I'm sure I toasted one of the transistors or something, but I did at least put that together. That was my first foray into kit building, and fortunately, it didn't turn me off completely. At some point later, I got a regenerative software receiver. I'm sorry, shortwave receiver, and I started listening to shortwave with this regenerative receiver, and was really impressed with just the world, coming into this thing. And I heard some amateur transmissions, but didn't pay much attention to it at the time. But I kind of got hooked on shortwave listening, and after a summer job, one time I bought a multi-band receiver, mainly for the shortwave. But I was tuning around in the public service band one time, and I discovered 2 meters, 2 meter FM, and local repeaters in the Chattanooga, Tennessee area there. And I think that's when I first became aware of amateur radio.
Rob, when did you get your first license?
Well, I had kind of forgotten, but I just recently located my first logbook, and so I have the date there that I found was 1974. It was September, and I noted it was a Friday the 13th. So that was actually a lucky day for me. I had that was a technician class license. I had taken it by mail. You could do it back then. I'd found one of my friend's father was a ham and was willing to give me the test, the code test, and the written test. And so we sent that off, and I'm not sure exactly what the date was that I took the test, but I got the license on Friday the 13th of 1974. I was 19. That was between my freshman and sophomore years of college.
And that was your technician class license then?
That's correct. Yeah, that was tech.
And do you remember the call sign?
Yes, it was WA4KVO. Whiskey Alpha 4 kilovolt oscillator, I think is what I said.
Did you have any mentors or other people that helped you along?
Yes, I did. There were several that helped me quite a bit. Not when I first started. I was sort of just working from books, and then, of course, when I got a license, got on the air, folks were helping. But certainly one of my college professors, Dr. Jesse Sherwood, whose call I don't remember, he was a huge help to me, and he showed me the practical side of radio in the physics labs. We measured the length of coax with a pulse generator and a high-speed pulse generator and a storage oscilloscope. We also, I'll never forget the day that we were doing an experiment with a magnetic resonance system. Big magnet, had water cooled, and some vial of material in it. And he pulled out a grid dip oscillator to find out the resonant frequency of that material. And I thought, well, here's a connection, certainly with radio and the physics that I was learning. One of the others in graduate school, he was a fellow graduate student. I went to New Mexico State University for my doctorate in astronomy. But there was a physics grad student there named Brad Mauger, KB5QZ. My call after I got upgraded to advanced in 1978 was KB5EZ. So we were always, people were confusing us. We're both bearded grad students. But Brad was really a brilliant electronics guy, and learned a lot from him about HF operating. And we built a repeater we took apart my HW202 Heath kit and made a repeater out of it. And so he built the control circuitry for that and the idea. And I learned so much practical stuff from him. In recent years, it was NM4T, Craig Barron's, a very good friend of mine who's now Silent Key as of early this year. And he really helped me out a lot with portable operating and quite a bit with just kind of how to manage volunteers. I've been in leadership positions in several ham clubs, and that's a different thing when you're managing volunteers and trying to get people to do something. But he had such a gentle way about him of doing that was really learned a lot from him in my experiences with him.
Now, you said earlier that you found your first logbook. Do you remember your first contact?
Yes, it was with W4RGB. Now, I lived in North Georgia at the time. I was going to school in South Georgia, Valdosta State, but I was home for the summer, and it was the very day that I got my license that I fired up the HW202 and made a contact with Bill, W4RGB. I was in Chickamauga, Georgia. He was in Benton, Tennessee, as I recall. I didn't have that in the log, but I do remember that, which is a distance of about 50 miles. And this was on simplex on 2 meters. I noticed in the log that he was really doing the heavy lifting on his end. He had an 11-element beam pointed at me, but he answered my CQ. He heard me. And so that was my very first contact. A couple of years later was my first HF contact. I had built an HR-10B Heath kit receiver, and there was a design for a single tube transmitter in QST. It was 80 and 40 meter, of course, crystal controlled, obviously. And I actually routed the power from the receiver out the back. There was an octal socket on the back of the receiver, and used that to power the transmitter. I'm sure I had a terrible chirp, but I made several contacts with that from my dorm room at Valdosta State. Just had a kind of a stealthy magnet wire running out the window of the dorm room, and it made a couple of contacts. I also noticed the log was filled with calling CQ and getting no answer. So it was probably about a 5 or 6 watt transmitter. And like I said, I'm sure there was a terrible chirp, but that was exciting to be on HF for the first time.
You mentioned the Heath kit HW202 2-meter transceiver kit.
That's right. And I built a Heath kit HW202. It's a 6-channel crystal-controlled 2-meter transceiver, 10 watt. And so that was my second foray into kit building. And fortunately, that was a lot more successful. I think I got an actual soldering iron this time. And the instructions, of course, that Heath kit generated were just phenomenally good. They were just so amazing. The drawings and the step-by-step and aligning the thing. I had no test equipment, so but you didn't need it. They really showed you how to do that without any test equipment.
That Heath kit HW202, I also built one probably at the same time. And that was an unusual rig because the transmit and receive frequencies, it was crystal controlled, remember? And that the receiver and the transmitter were different. You could actually listen on one frequency and transmit on another of one of your 6.
That's right. And in fact, I have one here. This is not my original one, but I found one at the Huntsville, Alabama Ham Fest I guess it was last year, and picked it up for $30 or something like that. And the thing still works amazingly, but it has the manual with it, and it was just stroll down memory lane, flipping through that manual and seeing where the guy who had built it had checked off each of the steps as he went along. And the other thing I noticed, Eric, was that the price, he actually had the receipt in there from Heath, and it was $180. And I thought, man, that's pretty cheap. But if you can do the calculation of the inflation rate, and it turned out that's about $1,100 in today's money.
The minimum wage was $2.10 an hour, I think, in those days.
Yeah, the radio equipment was very expensive back then. I had to turn on that inflation filter when we look at those prices in the pages of the old QSTs. But
did amateur radio play a part at all in the choices that you made for your education and career?
I can't say that it really did. It was kind of an underlying theme or underlying skill set, I guess, and all through college and graduate school. I decided I wanted to be an astronomer before I became a ham, and got a small telescope and just had a great deal of fun with that. And I really my interest was piqued in the late 60s with Star Trek was on TV. The movie 2001: A Space Odyssey had just come out, and that was almost like a religious experience for me. That was just such an amazing movie, especially after I read the book to understand what was going on. But the Apollo program was in full swing, and at that time I said, I need to be a part of that. I need to work for NASA someday, and just be a part of that space program. And I thought being an astronomer was the natural way to do it. Probably being an engineer would have been a more direct route, but I was certainly interested in astronomy. So all through my college and graduate school career, I had this kind of practical knowledge of electronics that really served me well. I think the understanding of when I was took a radio astronomy class, and it was Krauss. It was the W8JK, John Krauss, who wrote the book. I turned the page, and there was this section on Faraday rotation. And I thought, well, I've heard Faraday rotation on the satellites, on the amateur satellites before, and seeing the math, just making that connection was just really exciting for me. There were a few cases where having some background in making mistakes in electronics really helped me. When I was in graduate school, we had just begun interfacing computers to telescopes. And so we were This was in Las Cruces, New Mexico, at New Mexico State University. That's where I went to graduate school and got my doctorate in astronomy. But we hooked up an Apple II computer to the telescope with rotary encoders, like is in all of our radios these days, to figure out the position of the telescope. Before that, we had to use setting circles, these big graduated circles around the telescope. And I remember we first hooked it up, and I didn't build this stuff. We had a technician in the department who built it. But I hooked it up and wrote some software to do the peeks and pokes and, read the positions of the encoders from the interface card. And in one direction, we were getting double counts. It was counting twice. And I looked at the schematic and I saw a 50 ohm line driver sending the signal and a TTL component, on the other end receiving the signal. I thought, well, there's an impedance mismatch there. I know about those. I've done that with my antennas. And so I, talked to the technician and said, let's put a resistor, like 50 ohm resistor on that TTL side, and sure enough, the extra counts went away. We obviously had a problem along the coax somewhere where we're getting these reflections. So that kind of practical knowledge, I think, is just sort of tracked all through my career and has come into play many times later in my work.
And now this message from ICOM America. Ham for the holidays. ICOM's new ID52A and IC705 give hours of fun and enjoyment working your favorite bands this holiday season. ICOM's newest handheld amateur radio is the ID52A. The ID52A is a larger radio with a larger color display and louder audio. This VHF-UHF digital transceiver is much more than a replacement for the ID51A, but it also is a new way of communicating. The color display is 2.3 inches for exceptional viewability, and the audio is 80% louder. This multifunction dual-band D-Star transceiver supports DR mode for easy access to local repeaters based on internal GPS information as well as terminal access point modes. The ID52A has Bluetooth for audio and data control, providing improved mobility and control. And for the first time in amateur radio industry, you can now send photos from a connected Android device. Other features include wideband receiver with guaranteed ranges of 144 to 148 MHz and 440 to 450 MHz. It has a VV, UU, VU, and dual DV mode. Integrated GPS receiver, including grid square location. Micro SD card slot. Micro USB for data transfer, programming, and charging. And it's IPX7 waterproof. The ID52A is the perfect companion to the IC705. Both use compatible batteries and headsets, and you can also use the same Android app for D-Store operation. The IC705 is the perfect sidekick to the ID52A for hams that like to enjoy what both the great indoors and outdoors have to offer. This is the perfect QRP companion, base station features and functionality at the tip of your fingers in a portable package covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, 70 centimeters. This compact rig weighs in at just over 2 pounds with RF direct sampling for most of the HF band and IF sampling for frequencies above 25 megahertz. Other features include 4.3-inch touchscreen with live band scope and waterfall, 5 watts out with a BP272 battery pack, and 10 watts with 13.8 volts DC supplied. Single sideband CW, AM, FM, as well as full D-Star functions, touchscreen display, micro USB connector, Bluetooth, and wireless LAN. Integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger, micro SD card slot, speaker microphone. The HM243 comes standard. Supports QRP and QRPP operations. The perfect accessory for the IC705 is, of course, the optional backpack, the LC192, with a special compartment for your IC705 and room for accessories for soda activations or a day of social distancing in the park. The IC705 is now shipping. Follow the link in the ICOM banner ad in this week's show notes, or go to www.icomamerica.com/amateur for more information on these fine rigs. My thanks to ICOM America for sponsorship of the QSO Today podcast. And now back to our QSO. So you leave graduate school. Where did you go after that?
I went into the defense industry, the aerospace industry, worked for a company called the Aerospace Corporation in Los Angeles. I actually lived in Redondo Beach and got to work on the GPS satellites. I had a tiny role in that, but every time I turn on the GPS unit in my car or pull out my phone to figure out where the nearest fast food place is, I think, hey, I had a little bit to do with that. So that was pretty exciting.
Do you think we depend too much on GPS?
We depend on it a lot, and there are things that can go wrong, and I just wonder sometimes if we turned off the constellation for any reason, it would be pretty difficult. The farmers are using it. I'm sure all the delivery companies are using them, and we all have come to rely on it. But it's this pretty reliable system. There's a lot of reliability built into it, a lot of redundancy and such. So hopefully it'll be there.
And it also appears it's not the latest technology. It's, 70s, 80s technology?
Yeah, really, it was in the mid 80s, I think, where a lot of that technology was developed. It's been around for a while.
And how long did you spend in Redondo Beach? And I think at the time that you were there, by the way, you also in Redondo Beach had multiple campuses of Hughes aircraft at that time, which may be SpaceX now.
Well, I'm not sure about that, Eric. I know that there were multiple campuses. We were near TRW, and Hughes was not too far away. But I don't know if SpaceX is using any of those facilities or not today. I don't know.
I used to sell test equipment to Hughes and TRW in the 80s, so I remember that Redondo Beach was really heavily aerospace. So what did you do after that?
Well, after that, I moved to Huntsville. I wanted to get a little bit closer to home. Huntsville is in North Alabama, and it's only a couple of hours away from Chattanooga, where my family lives, or just south of Chattanooga. And so we wanted to move back here. I'd met and married my wife, Kim, and we decided we'd love to have a house, and you know how difficult that is to find a place in the LA area. We just wanted to get a little bit quieter lifestyle, I guess. I loved LA. I loved living near the beach and such, but it was pretty hectic. So we moved back here and worked for a couple of small defense contractors. And then within just, 3 or 4 years, I got on with Grumman and working on NASA programs for a change, not working defense programs, but civil space. And we were the integration contractor for the space station program. This was around 1990, 89, 90 timeframe. Then there was a major change in the station program. They moved all the management of it to Houston and kind of consolidated it there. And that's when I got on with NASA, moved to Johnson Space Center in Houston, and got to work in the space station program office there. Doing space environments, doing the radiation and meteoroids and orbital debris and plasma and those kind of things, making sure that the space station was designed to adequately handle those environments. And I guess we've done a good job because it's been continuously manned for 20 years and been working quite well. So that worked out pretty well.
So can I ask a question? And I realize this could be a whole lecture, and maybe I'll ask you to do a whole lecture, maybe at the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo. But how does the ISS avoid, or is it avoiding debris, or is it able to withstand a certain amount of debris?
It's both. It's able to withstand the smaller particles that are not trackable. The large particles can be tracked by ground-based radar, and they actually do collision avoidance maneuvers from time to time. And you'll hear about those in the news when they've had to. It's saying they dodged a particle or a dead spacecraft is kind of over-dramatizing it a little bit. But if they find something that looks like it's going to cross within some certain distance of the space station, they can do a reboost maneuver. They fire the engines to raise the orbit, which they have to do from time to time anyway, because the atmospheric drag will bring it down eventually. So they just do that early, and that kind of avoids that. So those are the things that are trackable, but the smaller particles that are not trackable, there's actually shielding on the space station. There's an outer aluminum shield, and then there's layers of Nextel and Kevlar material, like bulletproof vest material underneath that. And then there's the pressure vessel. So they can withstand impacts of particles of a certain size. The meteoroids are generally smaller, they're faster, and they're just not trackable. There are more of them during meteor showers, but there's not much you can do about those. You just, the orbital debris shielding is pretty effective against those most of the time.
Now, meteor showers themselves, are they happening all over the planet or in just certain parts of the planet? And does that mean that perhaps the space station also avoids those by changing its orbit slightly?
Yes, meteor showers are visible from half the Earth at any given time because they all come from kind of the same point in space. That's called the radiant. And that has to do with the orbit of the particles that were ejected from a comet, some maybe hundreds of years ago. And they're just in orbit around the sun. So half the Earth is exposed to those, but remember the station orbits in about 90 minutes. So it's going to cover half the Earth. So you always have that risk during part of the orbit. And the showers are long enough, they're longer than 90 minutes, that you have that risk. You're going to see them at any time. And then there's also the sporadic meteoroids. They're just the ones that are there all the time. And those are, pose a risk. But again, the shielding handles that fairly well. And the risk is fairly low. There's not that many of them, but it's something that we have to take into account and have to do the calculations and make sure that we're not exceeding some risk threshold with them.
It seems to me that the space station is in orbit and it's moving at a very high speed, and that the debris is the debris traveling in the same direction, and so therefore it's not like you've got debris coming at the spacecraft at the speed of the spacecraft plus the debris.
Yeah, you can have almost I guess the highest speed impacts would be the higher inclination orbits. There's plenty of material in 90-degree inclination. Space station's 51.6-degree inclination, and there's really nothing coming at it directly from head-on, where there would be a head-on collision, because there would be a retrograde orbit, and those aren't used very often just because of the energy. You like to use the rotational speed of the Earth. You launch in the direction the Earth is rotating, and that, you use that extra, whatever it is, 1,000 miles per hour or whatever speed to go into that type of orbit. But there's a lot of material in these high inclination orbits, and so you don't hit them head on, but they do kind of come from the front of the space station, and that's all been modeled and very well understood. But you can actually take advantage of that with the shielding on the station. It's beefier on the front bumper than it is on the back bumper, for instance. But it can kind of come at you from all directions. But you're right. Anything that's in a similar orbit would have to be catching up to you, and that's going to be a low velocity and low probability and probably not much damage.
Now, it's my understanding that the Starlink constellation will have something like 24,000 satellites in low Earth orbit. What kind of risk does that impose on launching spaceships from America or from any place in the world up to the space station in terms of collision avoidance? I guess the world is so large that 24,000 is really not a lot. How does that work out?
Yeah, this is not my precise technical area, so I don't know exactly how those are being handled, but they're certainly in orbits that are well known, orbital altitudes or sort of rings of orbits, and I would guess that folks will try to avoid those particular orbits, and then they have some requirements for bringing the spacecraft down. I think it's within 25 years. They have to deorbit them so that they don't just stay up there for a long time and become, gradually dragged down and then, get to space station orbit and cause a risk there. So all that's being managed and calculated and, dealt with by the Orbital Debris Program Office. And so I don't know a lot of details about that, but it certainly increases the risk. But space is big, but there's a lot of material there. I mean, there have been some satellite collisions in the past, and they're very rare, but they're not something that you would want to happen, of course, to your operational satellite, and certainly not to a manned spacecraft like a space station.
As an astronomer, what does all these constellations of satellites around the Earth, what kind of issues does that create for astronomers?
There's been concern about that. I think especially after the spacecraft are launched, they're kind of maybe in lower orbits, and then they're boosted higher, and that has been a problem. That's not something that I directly deal with, but I know that some of the astronomers have complained about that, and SpaceX is taking measures to try to, I think, maybe darken some of the surfaces of their spacecraft, and so it can be a problem. There are a lot of increasingly more kind of all sky survey telescopes that are looking all over the sky for asteroids, for potentially hazardous asteroids that could cross the Earth's orbit, and you really don't want to cause problems with those type of observations, to clutter the field essentially, or add noise to the field. But I know that they're actively working on that, trying to minimize the amount of interference from those spacecraft.
Let me take a quick break to tell you about my favorite amateur radio audio podcast, and that's the Ham Radio Workbench podcast with George, KJ6VU, Jeremy, KF7IJZ, and it now includes Michael Walker, VA3MW, where they pursue topics, technology, and projects on their ham radio workbenches every 2 weeks. The group documents their projects and makes circuit boards available to their listeners. They have interesting guests and go in deep. Jeremy may complain about the overall length of the podcast, but friends, let me tell you that I could listen to it all day, and that's good. Even if you are a seasoned ham radio builder or just getting started, be sure to join George, Jeremy, and Mike now for the Ham Radio Workbench podcast on every podcast player. Use the link on this week's show notes page by clicking on the image. And now back to our QSO Today. Rob, it seems you have a similar story to mine, where you took some time off from ham radio to arrive back at a different time in a different ham radio. What happened there?
Yeah, that's right. As I had started working, I don't remember ever getting on the air when I lived in the L.A. area, which is kind of a shame, because the amount of repeater coverage that you have there certainly could have been doing a lot of operating. And by then I had a synthesized radio, not just the 202, so I could have been operating, but really just didn't put up an antenna, didn't do anything, and then we. My wife and I started, having a family. Had 3 kids, and then moved to Huntsville. And I did get on the air occasionally. After we moved back to Huntsville, I had a Kenwood TS530, and loved that radio, and a vertical, 3-band trap vertical antenna, and would get on primarily during field day, just to operate from home, just to make a few contacts, but really was not very serious about it. And so probably for about 25 years there or so, after being very active in graduate school, came back in about 2010, I guess, and decided that I wanted to get back into the hobby. My kids were older, and so they weren't taking so much of my time. So I got a Yaesu FT950. That was the first modern radio that I had, and started doing some casual contesting. Just getting on during contests, making a few contacts, not trying to do anything competitive, and just loved it. My DX count went up dramatically. I hadn't really been chasing DX up until that point. So I thought, hey, this is pretty fun here, and really just dove back into it at that point. So yeah, it was mainly after the family got old enough that I could spend some time, and maybe had a little bit more money to spend on it, that I got back in, and boy, had things changed a lot.
You're kind of this Rip Van Winkle in the amateur radio world. What do you think, if you can remember, what the discovery was like coming back into amateur radio? What impressed you the most?
I think it was the quality of the equipment. The 530, the Kenwood, was a great radio. But, you had to turn on the marker generator to find out exactly what frequency you were on, to kind of calibrate things. And, you didn't have to do that on the 950. It was just dead on and no drift. And so I think that's what struck me after having dealt with all that stuff in the earlier days. It was just the quality of the receiver was just great. And I think the other thing is the online resources, which obviously didn't exist prior to the internet when I had sort of left the hobby or laid it aside for a while. There was just so much information available on the internet about various modes of operation and software that you could use and those kind of things. That I think those are the things that kind of struck me when I got back in.
What's your current rig?
It's a Yaesu FT-DX101D, which is absolutely my dream radio. It's just phenomenal. I got hooked on pan adapter displays back. I had the FT-DX3000 before this one, and had an LP Pan 2, which is like a little SDR connected to the IF output of that. And just really got hooked on pan adapters then. So of course this is built in. This is dual receiver. It's a hybrid super het and software defined radio, and just phenomenal performance. It just sounds good. Yeah, I mean it just really sounds great. And having the two receivers for doing a little bit of DXing. I'm not a very good CW operator. So I need all the help I can get, but I love to jump into a CW pileup on a DXpedition, and having the two receivers and the pan adapter display just makes that so much easier.
What is your favorite operating mode then?
It's interesting. As I said, I'm a struggling CW operator, so I enjoy CW contesting and DXing, but I would never be a running station. I'm always searching pounds so I can listen, a couple of times and get their call and get the exchange down. But I also, if my favorite contesting mode is actually radio teletype, RIDI. I don't know why it is, but it's just so exciting to see your call come back across the screen there, when you're working somebody. And I think that may be a generational thing because I've noticed I work the JARL RIDI contest. That's the Japanese contest. And the exchange is the age of the operator. And I actually did a plot of this one time of the ages of people. And I mean, if you work anybody under 50, it's pretty rare. Everybody's in the 60 and 70 range. So maybe it's just, that RIDI was such an amazing thing when I was first a ham. I like that. But, just for casual, just get on the air and just make some contacts. I really enjoy FT8 and FT4. I think those are just amazing modes, and they're not too challenging. Don't have to pay attention too closely like I do with CW. But I think I'll touch on phone operating as well. We've done a lot of special event operations with the Marshall Space Flight Center and other NASA amateur radio clubs, and those are a lot of fun on phone because first of all, you're the object of the pileup. People are calling us and searching us out. If we spot ourselves on the DX cluster, boom, there's a pileup 3 or 4 deep. And I love that. I love that adrenaline rush on phone. I would never do it on CW, but I do it on phone. And also just getting to chat with people. We'll be doing an anniversary of an Apollo mission, or we just recently did the 20 years of continuous human presence on space station, and the number of people who come back and say, "Hey, my uncle works for Boeing and worked on space station," or sometimes I ran across a guy one time with Apollo, and he said, "Hey, I was on the Hornet when we recovered the Apollo 11 crew," and I thought that was just amazing. So those. I do phone operations mainly for special events like that, so that's I don't just get on and rag chew, but I sort of do a little bit of all the modes, I guess.
I think I read on your QRZ page that you like to operate contests, but that you're not out necessarily to win. and that it creates a level of enjoyment for you that maybe without the pressure.
That's exactly right. It seems to me that after about 2 hours of intense contesting, I'm ready to take a break and do something else. And there's no way that you're going to win with that attitude. There's that old, you got to keep your butt in the chair thing to really win. But it's just fun. There's so many people on that it's easy to make those quick contacts, and it just feels good to make those. So, but having said that, though, I noticed that when I first started that contesting, I was operating low power. I just got an amplifier here, my first HF amplifier, just probably about a month ago. We got an Elecraft KPA 500. So I was always working 100 watts. Well, all the really competitive guys are working the high power. And so somehow I ended up with like a win in Alabama for low power phone only for sweepstakes several years back. And then kind of a similar thing for the IRU HF championship for the Alabama section, low power. So sometimes it pays to be the low power guy because it's a little bit less competitive there. So even with that, not too much time in the chair, I found myself, getting these certificates on the wall, which is kind of nice. It's sort of exciting to get those.
I think you are, or you were, the president of the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center Amateur Radio Club?
That's correct. Yeah, I was president for a couple of years, and I'm the vice president right now.
So as a guy who's probably belonged to other amateur radio clubs, what makes the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center Amateur Radio Club different from other amateur radio clubs?
I would say the makeup of the club members, because we're a combination of NASA people and a lot of engineers, electrical engineers and such, and also we're located on Redstone Arsenal. That's an Army facility, and so there are Army personnel who are members of our club as well. We sort of work with the organizations that's their employee services kind of organization. So anyway, they can be members of our club as well. And so they're probably half of our club members are Army, but they're all engineering, a lot of electrical engineers, some technicians. So it's a pretty well educated group, but we also have a lot of new hams in the club, which is I think really exciting. I really enjoy working with them sometimes to make their first HF contact, and certainly a lot of times to make their first contest contact. We'll do a contest operation or a special event operation from the club station, and they'll log for a while, and then we'll put them on the mic, and that is so much fun to watch them light up. They got the sweaty palms. They're nervous, but to kind of watch them light up and get hooked on it. We also do field day operations and winter field day, and have done some other kind of portable special event things. But I think it's back to your original question there. It's the makeup of the group is they're fairly technical people. And all nerdy types, just like the rest of us. That makes it a lot of fun. We all have similar interests, I guess, and similar backgrounds.
Now, does your club reach out to youth, and how do you reach out to youth in order to be able to bring them in? Do you have a secret formula?
It's a little bit difficult because our club station is on Redstone Arsenal, and there's limited access to that. So we can't just bring kids in very easily. There have been some that operated from our station whose parents were hams, who were employees there and had access. But we have done during field day. We've had young people. We typically do our field day from the Von Braun Astronomical Society observatory, which is on a mountain here near Huntsville. And so we're on the grounds there, and of course, field day, you're there on a Saturday night, and that's when they have their public programs. And many times we've had families, with their kids there for the planetarium program. And, oh, by the way, here are these people set up under a pop-up over here doing this radio thing. And so we've had some youngsters get on then, and that's been really good. But we don't have anything formal set up that way just because of the difficulty and access to our club station.
Now, you are popular at the Huntsville Hamfest for giving talks on various subjects. One of the subjects you gave was on the Apollo communication system. Is there something that you could say about the Apollo communication system that was it ahead of its time? Was it the technology of the time? What was unique about that system?
I think what struck me was, I guess, its simplicity and complexity of it. It was S-band, and it's sort of like they jammed everything into S-band, and they made it work. Now, there were some UHF, and they had some other stuff they used for recovery and launch and recover, I guess, kind of operations. But the fact that with the 60s technology, and that was probably mid-60s technology, they were able to get tracking information. They modulated the S-band signal with one of these pseudo-random number codes so they could do the ranging, kind of like GPS. It's a very similar kind of concept. And all the telemetry from the spacecraft, and obviously the voice communications and the video, all of that was kind of wedged into this one S-band signal. And I've seen pictures of the radio equipment, and it's incredibly tightly packed and complex. But that was a lot of fun doing that program, because I had to learn about it. I didn't know anything about that system, and there's a lot of web resources that talk about it. There were also, of course, some hams who were listening, guys who were set up for Earth, Moon, Earth. For moon bounce, pointed their antennas, and there were some articles in QST about this, who actually heard those guys when they were in lunar orbit, and later picked up the ALSEP. That's the surface science experiments. They were sending back seismic readings and radiation readings and things like that. There were hams who were picking up those signals with their moon bounce dishes.
Well, I guess I would imagine that the telemetry that a spacecraft in 1969, I remember the landing on the moon, I guess it was the summer of 69. I can tell you what I remember about that, and maybe you can concur, or maybe you have a comment on it, that while television cameras at that time were huge, these guys had this little tiny black and white camera that was able, with the radio package, to send live video from the moon. I thought at the time, being maybe 11 years old, but I still thought it was kind of remarkable. Was there some remarkable technology that obviously we benefit from now that was going on there in 69?
I think it was the way they utilized the technology of the time was remarkable. They had Vidicons. They didn't have CCD cameras. It was all Vidicons. And to get color from those cameras, they spun a filter wheel, a red, green, blue filter wheel in front of a mechanical filter spun in front of it. And then they would decommutate that or whatever on the ground and generate, a color TV signal. And that really struck me as how clever that was. And I think they used that same technology even kind of early into the shuttle program, space shuttle. You would see something move rapidly across the field of view, and you would see, separate red, green, and blue images. So you could tell that they were still using that kind of technology. So that was pretty amazing. And that signal went right back into the S-band system, and was just another one of those streams of information in the S-band.
You've also given presentations on meteor scatter. Do you also operate meteor scatter?
I do. I'm not one of the heavy hitters. Like I said, I've been running 100 watts here until I got this amplifier, and I haven't really fired it up on meteor scatter yet. I just have a hex beam antenna here at home, so I don't have a lot of antenna gain. But the club station, the NASA club station, we have a 5-element beam, and that's where I've done most of my meteor scatter work. So I've made a few contacts, maybe, 2 or 3 dozen, something like that. Certainly not like a lot of the guys that are on that do meteor scatter regularly, but it takes a lot of patience. It's kind of exciting when you make a contact. Of course, the digital modes, I think it's FSK 441. Is that right, or MSK 441? Anyway, it's one of those WSJT-X modes, from the Joe Taylor and Frankie and those guys, is what you use, and that makes it possible for little pistols like my station to make those contacts. I think what really attracts me to that is because I've done meteor science for NASA, trying to understand the meteoroid environment. I've kind of got that science background in the back of my head, thinking about the geometry of where is the radiant and where is this station I'm talking to, and what's the optimal direction for me to have my antenna pointed. And there are tools online that help you understand this stuff, but I kind of have a little background now on why that is the case. Why that's why you have to have your antenna, why it's more optimal to have your antenna pointed in a particular direction when the radiant is a particular location. It's because of the geometry of the scattering off of this ionization trail from the meteor, which you can think of as like a metal tube up there at 100-kilometer altitude. You get the optimal scattering off of it, in particular geometry. So, having that background and knowing a little bit about the showers and the speeds of the meteors and all that makes it a little bit more exciting. And that's what I've tried to get across in my talk on meteor scatter, is giving the science background to help people understand more of the science of the meteors, so that they can sort of enjoy the contacts more.
Have you done any aircraft scatter?
I have inadvertently done that. I was trying to talk to a local guy here after a club net. We have a net on Tuesday nights here for our club, and we were trying to do a direct contact, and we're not hearing each other at all. And then all of a sudden, I heard him, and it had that characteristic flutter on it of and those are called Fresnel zones. And there's meteor scattering has really, really similar physics and math that goes into that. So I have done that, and I actually have heard that multiple times when doing meteor scatter. And I just know it's an airplane because it's so solid. It doesn't fade as quickly as a meteor does. So I haven't done it on purpose, but have certainly seen the signals from aircraft scatter.
Is it safe to say that amateur radio operators who worked for NASA or in the space program, and I think that it's safe to say maybe in the 60s that there were a lot of companies that contributed, like RCA, for example, contributed to the programs like the Apollo program, that amateur radio operators doing garage science contributed to the effort to putting a man on the moon and the technology that subsequently followed?
I'm sure that's the case. I couldn't point to any particular people, but the contractor base is really important to the space programs and obviously the NASA employees as well. And there are a lot of hams there. I'm sure that there were hams involved in that S-band communication system that Apollo used, and I know there are hams involved in the current systems that we're building because I know some of the people. But I would think so, and I think it gets back to what I mentioned earlier. It's that you just have kind of an intuitive feel after being a ham for a while and building antennas and making the mistakes with the radios. You have an intuitive feel for the practical side of that electrical engineering that you need to pay attention to. And so I think I'm sure that there were probably a lot of people who learned that trade, who learned those types of things as hams, who were part of all of those programs.
So the second half of my question then is, do you think that amateur radio operators today doing garage science also apply those skills to NASA programs now?
It could very well be. Again, I don't know for sure, but I'll bet there are folks who are innovating in their garages. I think about some of these discussions I've heard about using the automotive radars for communications. Who knows what's going to come from that? Tinkering around with those type of things that could end up in the some of the hardware of the future. Those are frequency ranges we don't have a lot of experience with, and it's hard to say, but I'll bet there's some contribution there. potentially.
I also understand that you like to operate in the field, in a park. I think you did national parks on the air. What do you like about that? What's the secret ingredient there?
It's sort of a minimalist station attitude. It's, setting up, I like picnic table portable kind of things, or the radio in the car, but string up a G5 RV in the trees. Or, if you're concerned about the park not wanting you to put things in the trees, I carry along a crappie pole, a fishing pole, and kind of string it up on that. Did that several times. But it's, that's just bare bones. That's an antenna and the radio. And you've got to bring your own power with you, right? Either run it off the car battery, or I always had a deep cycle battery with me that I operated with. And then just being outdoors, when the weather's nice, and just being out, with the breeze blowing, and talking to people around the country. It's pretty cool. And I think one of the best parts of it is when a passerby comes up and says, "Well, what are you doing here? What is this?" And there's your chance to do that elevator talk about amateur radio. And who knows, you may inspire somebody, or at least they're aware of that amateur radio exists.
Do you have collateral material or cards or something like that you might give to somebody that comes up and asks you?
I haven't done that, except we do that with Field Day, of course. But no, I haven't done that with my normal operations. I probably should. That'd be a really good idea.
What's the project that's on your bench right now?
Well, I think I just got a new battery here. A friend of mine picked up a batteries for several of the club members. They're from a data center that got rid of their UPS batteries. After their 10-year batteries, but after 5 years they had to get rid of them, and they're really cheap. And so I'm configuring that in a box with probably we'll hook that to my solar power charger here and such. So that's the primary thing that I've been tinkering with here over the past week or so.
You mentioned earlier that you've operating a hex beam. I'm in the market for a hex beam. What do you like about the hex beam, and do you find it to be like a quieter antenna than the G5 RV?
Oh yeah, and it's not really a tight beam on the in the forward direction, but it seems to have a really good front to back ratio. So it really cuts out a lot of noise from behind you, and it does make a difference. I have a really small lot here, so there's not much space here. There's no way I could get a TH11 like we have at the club station in my backyard here. There are too many trees around and such. So the hex beam fits in that. It was easy assembly, and it just works. I've got it on a push-up pole, and I have it guide, and it's I've been really impressed with it. I just added a better rotator. I was using just a TV antenna rotator for a long time, and finally added a high gain rotator to it here. But it really makes a difference when I point it toward Europe in a DX contest. I do have to swing it around in domestic contests, so it's got some gain, and it's all bands 6 meters up through 20 meters, including 17 and 12. So it's got good coverage across the HF spectrum. So
you didn't buy the 40-meter kit?
I didn't. I was afraid I wouldn't have room for it. I think it would probably bump into some trees or into the house or something here. It's awfully close and an awfully small lot.
It sounds to me like your wife seems to be pretty understanding about your amateur radio hobby now. What kind of impact has amateur radio had on your family life?
She's been very supportive. I mean, she puts up with all these dipoles I have strung in the trees, and I have a window line running to them, so it's not very attractive. And then the hex beam has taken up a good part of the backyard, and she just puts up with it, and she knows I enjoy it. She's been supportive of that and any equipment purchases. She's also, I think, kind of enjoys the portable operations that I do from time to time. We'd like to go to a cabin here in one of the local state parks from time to time, just for the weekend. And I'll usually try to pick a weekend when there's a contest of some sort. And so I've worked, North American QSO parties and some of the other contests from a cabin. And again, I take my G5RV or that's typically what I've used, and string it in a tree behind the cabin. And I have my Go Box here, which has an IC7300 in it, which is great. It's a great radio for that type of thing. And she, does her puzzles. She likes to build puzzles, and I get on the air and make some contacts, and it's so she's very supportive of that.
You mentioned that you have a Go Box. A Go Box is not something that you take on soda. It's something that you kind of have to lift with two hands. What's in the Go Box besides the IC7300?
Let's see. It has a tuner. I have the LDG AT200 Pro 2 tuner, and I also put in a Samlex power supply. If I'm operating picnic table portable, it's usually with a battery of some sort, but I do have the power supply when we're operating from the cabin. And then there's also a wind keyer that I use for keying any CW contest. I don't touch the paddle very often. It's like I say, I do mostly search and pounce contesting, so I can just push buttons and do the full contact and exchange. But and there's a little speaker in there as well too, to kind of get the speaker firing forward instead of up into the box. But it's one of these, maybe it's a 6U container that usually they have sound systems in for bands and things like that. It does take both hands. It's not a backpack thing, but it's not too bad.
What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
I think it's the technology, that melding of digital technology with the old analog. I think the software-defined radios are just amazing in their capabilities, and just this idea of cat control of the radio. You couldn't do that back when I first started hamming. There were no computers to do that sort of thing. And then, of course, the digital modes too. That's really, I think, kept the hobby, kept the bands alive during solar minimum here. So that's been pretty cool to see that. I think that those FT8 came along at just the right time. I was doing JT65 HF before that, but that's a lot slower mode. But it worked, and I really enjoyed that. I think the quality of even the low end radios, the stability, the receiver performance, just the purity of the transmitters. You really don't have to worry about out of band transmissions or anything. They just all work very well. And I think as I mentioned before, the online resources are just amazing. That's a form of virtual Elmering kind of. You can get connected with a group for just about any type of radio or any operating mode or any type of antenna. There's a hex beam group out there. If you're interested in that. And, people talk about the problems they've had or how they've solved them or those kind of things. And that is a form of Elmering, I think, that is very important.
So you mentioned cat control. Does that mean that you're operating your main station by remote control?
I have done it from like another room. I haven't done it from outside the house here. But yeah, I set up at one point. Had a Raspberry Pi set up and kind of in the game room. I'd be watching TV and doing FT8 contacts. So that's about as far as I've gone with that. Not nearly as advanced as a lot of the guys who do the remote operations.
What advice would you give to newer returning hams to the hobby?
I think get on the air. I see that with some new hams in our club who are maybe nervous about getting on the air, sort of reluctant, and that's why we reach out to them and try to we can't be with them physically now, but we can be on 2 meters while they're making their HF contact or that kind of thing. But I think it's really important to do that. And I know there are a lot of folks that just like to build, the makers out there. That's all great. But I think, just putting a radio in the air and making some contacts is it makes you want to do it more. You may be a little nervous when you first do it, but it makes you want to do it more. So I think that's important. And I think along those lines too is just try contesting. I've given talks to our club a couple of times about wading into the contest ocean. You don't have to jump right in head first. You can kind of wade in and make a few contacts during a contest. There's just a lot of people on the air. It's a target-rich environment, as they say. We found too that using Zoom or Discord during some contest or some of our special event ops, it allows us to chat with folks and in the club as they're making the contacts, and that sort of helps. And I think that the last thing I'll add one more thing here is join a club. Being involved with a club is so important. Connecting with the community locally, and as I said, there are lots of opportunities to do that if you don't have local clubs, to do that online with that online community. What I've learned from my many Elmers in the North Alabama DX Club, which is something else I'm involved with here, has just been amazing, and I would not have learned a lot about DXing that I've gotten from them just having dinner with these guys. When we were able to do that, and we're meeting all on Zoom now, and there's some really top-notch DXers and contesters, and a couple of the guys in that club are regular contributors to QEX. So we have some really top-notch technical experts in that group as well. So that's one example of the how the clubs can help you out.
Well, it seems to me that you're a recent newcomer then to the North Alabama DX Club, and yet they've made you Ham of the Year, I think, didn't they?
Yeah, that was really a shock. And they made it. They always make it clear when they do the voting for that that it's not just the top DXer, because I'm not the top DXer. I'm telling you, I've got maybe a little over 200 confirmed, and there are guys in there that have them all. So it's not about that, but I had been vice president, I guess, that year, and was responsible for getting the programs and helping out with the banquet that we have. And so I think it's more of a service thing. But that was a real honor, and that was a surprise. I was really excited about that, and I have that proudly hanging on my wall here.
Rob, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you don't mind all of the questions about NASA and space. I never get to speak to a NASA space scientist, or at least not very often, so I had to take advantage of that, and I hope that the listeners will enjoy it as well. Thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast.
Well, you're welcome, Eric. It's been a lot of fun, and thanks for inviting me.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Rob. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in NN4NT in the search box at the top of the page. Be sure to click on the Expo menu item at the top of the page for updates on the upcoming QSO Today Virtual Ham Radio Expo in March 2021. I'm updating it as I have more information. My thanks to ICOM America for its support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of ICOM America by clicking on their banner in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any other episode into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages, or use my Amazon link before shopping at Amazon. Amazon gives me a small commission on your purchases while at the same time protecting your privacy. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as I head towards episode 400. QSO Today is now available in the iHeart Radio, Spotify, YouTube, and a bunch of other online audio services, including the iTunes Store. Look on the right side of the show notes pages for a listing of these services. You can use the Amazon Echo and say, "Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn." My thanks to Ben Bresky, who edits every single show and allows both this host and my guest to sound brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Until next time, this is Eric, 4Z1UG, 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.